Silent Marx Brother was never actually silent. Harpo had a voice the whole time, and the few people who heard it were shocked by how different it sounded. But the real shock came when unreleased audio surfaced decades after his death. In those recordings, he talked about smuggling secrets out of Moscow, scandals the studio buried, and a marriage so secret even his own brothers did not know. The tapes were not meant for the public, and hearing them changes the entire story of who Harpo Marx really was. Harpo Marx came into the world on November 23, 1888, and even his first address tells you what kind of life was waiting for him. It was 179 East 93rd Street in Manhattan, in Yorkville, in a cramped tenement where immigrant families packed into tight rooms and tried to hold on. His name at birth was Adolf Marx, and his family carried old European roots from places like Alsace and East Frisia. But in New York, that history did not buy them warmth or space or safety. They were poor in the simplest way. One room, little heat, no real comfort. And somehow that same room had to hold a whole family that kept growing. His father was Sam Marx, the man people called Frenchie, and he had come to America with almost nothing after leaving Alsace behind. He took whatever work he could get, tailoring, peddling, odd jobs, anything that could turn into food for 6 children. Even then, life still felt like a math problem that never solved. In the 1890s, the family was surviving on less than $10 a week, and that number meant every day was a choice between something you needed and something you could not have. The building itself, a converted brownstone stuffed with other families, became their whole world. The Marxes stayed there for 14 years, long enough for Harpo to grow from a baby into a teenager without ever knowing what it felt like to truly have room to breathe. At night, kids slept 3 to a bed, and when the holidays came, they used the air shaft to hang Christmas stockings because there was nowhere else. So from the start, Harpo learned that the street was not outside the home. It was part of the home. And when you grow up like that, you get tough in ways you do not even notice. By the time he was 4, he was already dodging gangs and petty trouble in the slums, running errands, selling newspapers, doing whatever a child could do to help a family that never had enough. School did not save him. It hit him harder. He was bullied for being Jewish, and the cruelty was not just words. One day, classmates threw him out of a second-story classroom window when the teacher stepped out. He failed 2nd grade twice, and at age 8, he quit school for good, which meant he grew up without the tools most kids take for granted. He could not rely on books. He had to rely on instincts. That is how the city shaped him. Not softly, but sharply. He worked corners with his older brother Chico, selling papers in freezing weather, and he bounced through odd jobs in the tenement world around Carnegie Hill, delivering meat, running as an office errand boy, doing anything that paid. One day, in a butcher shop, he dropped a heavy meat carcass, and the chaos that followed stayed with him. Dogs came at him, snapping and chasing, and he had to move fast to avoid getting hurt. Later, that kind of panic became timing. The reflex became comedy. The danger turned into a skill he could use. And then, as if the streets were not enough, life tested his body too. At age 10, he got typhoid fever from contaminated water, and it nearly killed him. He was bedridden for months, stuck in silence and weakness, separated from the noise of the city that had raised him. That kind of sickness changes a kid. It makes the world feel far away. So he reached for something that could bring him back. And that is where music started to grab him, not as a hobby, but as a lifeline. The strange part is that the family could only afford music lessons for one child, and that was Chico. Harpo had no formal training waiting for him. Still, he wanted sound in his hands. So he stole moments wherever he could. He would sneak into a neighbor's place just to touch a harp, and he taught himself by copying an image he once saw of a harp-playing angel in a five-and-dime store. He tuned it by ear because he could not read music, and he learned to play the way his own mind understood. 3 years after he started, he discovered he had been tuning it wrong. But even that mistake became his signature. The odd tuning reduced tension on the strings and gave him a sound that felt different, and he kept it. He never learned to read sheet music, and he never stopped playing his way. While all of this was happening, another force was shaping the whole family, and that was his mother, Minnie. She did not look at childhood the way other parents did. She looked at it like a clock. She had a brother, Al Sheehan, who had made it in vaudeville, and Minnie believed the stage was the only real escape from poverty. So she pushed her sons hard. She demanded practice, long rehearsals, no excuses. Sometimes she locked them in a room until routines were right, because in her mind, the world outside was worse than any strict rule inside. The cost was obvious. The boys missed the easy parts of being kids. They grew up fast. They argued about money and direction, and that tension became part of the family's rhythm. Harpo felt that pressure early, and it hit him in the most humiliating way. When Minnie forced him onto a stage for the first time, fear took over, and he wet his pants in front of the audience. It stayed with him, not as a funny memory, but as a scar. Yet Minnie did not slow down. She kept pushing because she believed pain now could mean survival later. And little by little, Harpo learned a trick that would become his whole identity. If words failed him, his body could speak. If the moment got too scary, he could turn it into a gag. That is how shyness began to transform into a silent style. Then the stage became real work. In 1902, when he was just 14, Adolph Marx stepped into performance life as part of the Leroy Trio, managed by Minnie. They traveled and performed song and dance routines, often in rough theaters where everything felt cheap and uncertain. They rode trains, slept in low-cost boarding houses, and played to crowds that were not always kind. He was the straight man beside Chico's piano energy, even though Harpo still had no real formal training in comedy or music. But he had presence. He had a quick mind. And once he heard laughter, it did something to him. It gave him a reason to keep going. By 1905, the trio had grown enough to get longer runs, and that meant the grind increased, but so did the confidence. In 1906, he joined Gus Edwards' Postal Telegraph Boys, a traveling act built around young performers. He toured as a boy soprano, and the shows included blackface, which was treated as normal entertainment at the time, even though it was rooted in ugly stereotypes and cruelty. The makeup was uncomfortable, the work was exhausting, and audiences could be harsh. Sometimes they jeered, sometimes they threw things, but Harpo kept getting stage time, and stage time is a teacher that does not care about your feelings. It forces you to adapt. By 1908, the act was changing again. Harpo and his brothers formed the Four Nightingales, and the mood shifted from straight singing toward comedy and satire. They started mocking high society and poking at pretension, and Harpo found something important in the middle of that transition. When he forgot lines, he covered the gaps with pantomime. Big expressions, sharp gestures, wild physical bits that made the crowd look at him instead of his mistake. That was the moment the silent Harpo began to appear, not as a plan, but as a survival move that worked so well it became the core of his presence. Of course, the road did not reward them with safety. It tested them again. In 1910, during a run in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a fire destroyed their props and costumes, and suddenly they lost nearly everything they relied on. The show still had to go on, There was no time to rebuild properly. So they improvised, leaning on nerve and chaos instead of polished material. It was embarrassing and shocking, but it also proved something. When disaster hits, some performers freeze. The Marx Brothers learned to turn it into fuel. And then came a moment that showed how cruel the world could be to traveling entertainers. In 1912, during a stop in Texas, Harpo was arrested for vagrancy after a show bombed and the audience refused to pay. Just like that, he went from a performer to a problem in the eyes of strangers. He spent a night in jail, and during that night, he was beaten by local thugs. The next day, Minnie paid the bail and got him out. But you do not walk away from something like that unchanged. It taught him to distrust authority, to expect unfairness, and to keep his guard up even when he was making people laugh. So when people later saw Harpo as this wild, silent tornado on stage, it did not come from nowhere. It came from a 179 East 93rd Street. It came from less than $10 a week. It came from the second-story window, the early jobs, the typhoid fever at age 10, and the harp he learned by ear because nobody was going to teach him. It came from Minnie's pressure, the shame of stage fright, the constant touring, and the night in jail in 1912. Harpo Marx stepped into vaudeville almost by accident, pulled in by blood and survival more than ambition. In January 1910, he joined his older brothers Julius and Milton, who the world would later know as Groucho and Gummo. At first, they were just a small singing act called the Three Nightingales, moving from town to town and chasing applause wherever they could find it. A few years later, around 1914, everything shifted because of a simple mistake. A Chicago critic wrote their name wrong in a review and called them the Marx Brothers. The name stuck. By 1915, they were headlining on the Keith and Orpheum circuits, and the act was no longer neat or polite. It was chaos by design. Harpo was the storm inside that chaos. He chased chorus girls across the stage, interrupted scenes with sudden noise, and once honked a taxi horn in the middle of an act just to break the rhythm. Audiences loved it. His nickname came from the harp he carried with him, an instrument that felt strange in comedy, but somehow worked. While World War I made travel difficult and shut down many acts, the Marx Brothers kept drawing crowds. Harpo would pull impossible objects from his coat, things that made no sense and did not need to. The brothers survived tough years together, shaped by their mother Minnie's strict control and constant money problems. That pressure welded them into a unit long before fame arrived. Harpo was never meant to be silent. In the early years, he spoke on stage like everyone else, but something was off. Directors noticed his line delivery felt awkward and often killed the timing of scenes. Instead of fixing it, the brothers leaned into it. Around 1917, they made Harpo mute. What looked like a weakness turned into his greatest weapon. Without words, he became freer. He communicated with looks, movement, horns, whistles, and wild expressions. He pulled scissors, bicycles, and endless props from his pockets. Against Groucho's fast talk and Chico's piano, Harpo became pure motion. The contrast made the act stronger. By the time they reached Broadway, with I'll Say She Is in 1924, his silence felt essential, not accidental. Then, the world shut down again. In 1918, the Spanish flu hit hard. Shows stopped, money disappeared. The brothers were stranded. Harpo survived by playing harp in Chicago speakeasies, night after night, slipping through back doors and avoiding prohibition raids. He played for flappers and drifters, and sometimes romance followed. More importantly, the harp paid the bills. What started as a stage gimmick became a lifeline. That music stayed with him. Later, when he played harp in films like Duck Soup and A Night at the Opera, audiences felt something real underneath the jokes. Those moments came from survival, not polish. Survival came at a cost. In 1919, a backstage incident in Atlantic City almost destroyed everything. Harpo pantomimed stealing from a rival act's dressing room. It was meant as a joke. It turned into a brawl. Lawsuits followed, and the brothers faced the real possibility of being shut out of theaters. To save the act, Minnie made a desperate move and cut a private deal with the theater owner. The family survived, but the damage stayed. It was a reminder that vaudeville was not just laughs and applause. It was brutal and sometimes ugly. By May 19, 1924, Harpo finally stood on Broadway at the Casino Theater in I'll Say She Is. One 20-minute pantomime scene changed everything. He pretended to steal silverware from a society dinner, slowly, shamelessly, and without a word. The audience lost control. Applause stopped the show. That single bit reportedly pulled in about $1,500 a week, a huge sum at the time. Al Jolson came back again and again just to watch it, later calling it the funniest thing he had ever seen on stage. Backstage was chaos, rehearsals were messy, and Minnie even broke her ankle before opening night. She still showed up on a stretcher. Nothing stopped them now. The momentum carried into the Coconuts, which opened on December 8, 1925. Harpo played a harp playing thief in a hotel full of madness. He improvised constantly. During one rehearsal, he grabbed real fire hoses and flooded the stage, nearly shutting the production down. Producer Sam Harris was furious. The audience did not care. The show ran for 276 performances and made the brothers stars in New York. Harpo's refusal to play safe became his signature. Animal Crackers followed in 1928, and by then, Harpo was unstoppable. He chased Margaret Dumont through high society scenes, played a violin with a saw, and turned nonsense into art. The show ran for 171 performances, and at its peak, Harpo earned about $2,000 a week, money that would equal more than $3,000 today. Critics ran out of words and leaned on awe instead. This success pushed the brothers straight toward film. Behind the curtain, Harpo lived just as wildly. He chased women as relentlessly as he chased laughs, often hiding affairs with chorus girls while his married brothers ran interference. Tires were slashed. Tempers flared. At one rehearsal, he crossed a line by exposing himself to an understudy as a joke. A formal complaint followed, and the production nearly collapsed. Florenz Ziegfeld stepped in and quietly paid to keep the story out of the papers. The silence around that moment lasted for decades. Hollywood arrived in 1929 with the Coconuts. The brothers filmed during the day at Paramount's Astoria studios and performed Animal Crackers on Broadway at night. Days stretched to 18 hours. The stock market crashed, but the film still made around $500,000 initially and about $1.8 million worldwide. The brothers hated the final cut and even tried to buy and destroy it. Paramount refused. The audience had spoken. Animal Crackers followed on film in 1930. Harpo swallowed a whistle on camera to mimic a bird, nearly choking during rehearsal. The take stayed. The film earned about $1.5 million. Rare color footage later showed Harpo without his wig, a quiet reminder that even icons were experiments once. Monkey Business came in 1931, and chaos followed them west. Harpo smuggled alcohol onto set during Prohibition and was arrested mid-shoot, delaying production by a week. The film was banned in Ireland and cut 16 times before release. It still succeeded. Horse Feathers followed in 1932, with Harpo injuring a stuntman during a ladder gag. The film earned about $2 million and pushed satire further than before. Then came The Shadow. Harpo's affair with Thelma Todd in the early 1930s turned into whispers after her mysterious death in 1935. She was found dead in her car. Harpo was investigated and cleared, but rumors never fully faded. Years later, he admitted to ghostwriting love letters for her, reopening old questions with no answers. In 1933, when Duck Soup reached theaters, Harpo Marx slipped into the role of Vaudeville, a spy hiding inside the chaos of the fictional country of Fredonia. What followed felt almost unreal. Inside the president's palace, a hallway scene unfolded where Harpo dressed exactly like Groucho and copied every move he made. Hair combed at the same time, cigars lit together. Steps matched without a single word spoken. The timing was so exact that many viewers were convinced they were watching one man and his reflection. The scene ran close to 5 minutes and never lost its rhythm. It came from an old vaudeville idea, but the Marx Brothers stretched it into something sharper and smarter. Even director Leo McCarey was stunned by how precise it turned out. When the film first opened, audiences stayed away and the box office numbers disappointed. Yet time flipped the story. Duck Soup became a cult favorite, later named one of the greatest film comedies ever made by the American Film Institute. In Italy, Mussolini banned it for mocking dictators, which only added to its legend. That strange magic followed Harpo when the brothers moved to MGM for a night at the opera in 1935. Harpo made one request in his contract. He wanted his own harp. He had taught himself to play by staring at a painting of a harpist and copying finger positions. And now the studio had to respect that. In the film, he performed a solo called Alone. The story goes that the entire orchestra went silent while he played. The moment felt fragile and powerful at the same time. The movie earned $3 million in 1935, which would be around $65 million today. And suddenly, the Marx Brothers were a sure thing again. Then came the contract-ripping scene. A thick legal document was shredded piece by piece, until business itself turned into nonsense. Much of it was improvised. The message was clear. Authority meant nothing in their world. MGM renewed their deal and locked in what became their golden era. By 1937, during a day at the races, Harpo's energy pushed things into risky territory. In one sanitarium scene, he slid down a laundry chute that turned out to be far too slick. He nearly smashed into a wall, delaying filming for almost an hour, but the stunt stayed in the movie. He shaved patients with a stethoscope, crossed lines that polite comedy usually avoided, and then chaos spilled over when he accidentally set a prop bed on fire. Smoke filled the set, and production stopped cold. That moment never made it into the final cut, but the story lived on inside the studio. When the film opened on June 11, 1937, it felt wild and loose, anchored by Groucho's doctor routine and Harpo's fearless physical comedy. In 1939, At the Circus opened with Harpo swinging into the film on a hammock, easing the audience toward Groucho's performance of Lydia the Tattooed Lady. The song rolled through history and pop culture in rapid-fire jokes, and it stuck with audiences right away. Behind the scenes, things were tighter. Director Edward Buzzell wanted control. Harpo wanted freedom. When Buzzell tried to rein in his ad-libs, Harpo pushed back by sneaking in a nude statue gag that made the cast laugh and the director fume. The film marked a shift. MGM was starting to struggle with how to package Harpo's chaos inside a polished studio system. By 1940, things turned darker during Go West. Harpo was involved in a serious scandal with a 16-year-old extra. MGM reacted fast and quietly. He was banned from the lot for a time, rules were tightened, and witnesses were silenced. Rumors followed him for years. His reputation as Hollywood's most reckless bachelor hardened. and his relationship with the studio never fully recovered. The end came quietly in 1941 with The Big Store. Released on June 20th, the film was meant to celebrate the Marx Brothers one last time. Harpo skated through a department store in a dangerous chase that broke his wrist. The laughs were there, but audiences were drifting away. MGM lost over $1 million. It was also the last time Margaret Dumont appeared with them. After that, the brothers went their separate ways. Groucho moved to radio. Chico chased music. Harpo stepped back. After the war, Harpo returned often as a guest on You Bet Your Life from 1947 through 1960. Groucho hosted. Harpo honked, played harp, and helped shape jokes behind the scenes. Millions listened. The show moved from radio to television and became one of the most popular programs of its time, backed by DeSoto automobiles. For years, few realized how much Harpo helped guide its humor. In 1955, he appeared on I Love Lucy, filmed on March 24th. He taught Lucille Ball pantomime comedy, including a cigar-lighting gag that went wrong when Lucy inhaled real smoke and broke into coughing fits. Retakes followed. Laughter stayed real. Harpo believed in spontaneity. One clean take mattered more than endless rehearsal, and the episode became a favorite. In 1959, he stunned a crowd one last time with a jazz classical harp performance on the Bell Telephone Hour. Even Arturo Toscanini was said to be amazed. Soon after, heart trouble forced Harpo to stop performing. His final television role was dramatic. He played a deaf-mute witness to a murder in a Christmas-themed play called A Silent Panic. The silence had come full circle. There were close calls along the way. During a television rehearsal in the 1950s, a prop gun misfired and injured a child actor. Panic spread. The lawsuit was settled quietly. The story stayed buried for years. Harpo's private life stayed hidden, too. On September 28, 1936, he secretly married Susan Fleming in New Jersey. Even his brothers did not know. The secret lasted until President Franklin D. Roosevelt sent a congratulatory telegram that accidentally exposed the marriage. Susan had proposed 3 times before Harpo finally said yes. They stayed together for 28 years, to the exact day. There was another side no one expected. In 1933, Harpo traveled to Moscow as a goodwill performer after the United States recognized the Soviet Union. Quietly, he acted as a courier for the U.S. Embassy, smuggling diplomatic papers taped to his leg. Soviet guards watched him closely, but they never searched him. He later joked about finally scratching his leg after 10 days. FBI files confirmed it. The silent clown had been a spy. Off camera, he was not silent at all. He had a deep baritone voice with a heavy New York accent. Private tapes from the 1960s revealed stories of his youth, piano gigs in brothels, illnesses, and things he never shared publicly. Fans never heard that voice until much later. In October 1963, at the London Palladium, Harpo stepped on stage for the last time. He spoke into a microphone and said, "Now, as I was about to say in 1918, thank you." It was the only time he ever spoke publicly. The crowd froze, then exploded with applause. In 1964, heart attacks caught up with him. On September 27th, he underwent risky bypass surgery in Los Angeles. The next day, September 28th, his 28th wedding anniversary, Harpo Marx died at 75 with Susan beside him. Groucho cried openly at the funeral. His autobiography, Harpo Speaks, was published in 1961 and sold over 1 million copies by 1985. Letters unsealed decades later revealed secrets, jokes, and even tax tricks. His harps were preserved. His influence lived on in comedy, cartoons, and silent film revivals. The man who rarely spoke left behind a voice that never really stopped echoing.